Mr. Crowley! Cha-cha-cha! What's going on in your head?
Whew. What a day. Good gods, so tired.
Hey, what the devil?
Oh, right. Forgot about that.
What the bloody hell happened?
You see, I engaged on a raid.
Yes?
I was supposed to pillage and burn, right?
Go on.
I kept it on my head. Pillage and burning, pillaging and burning, pillaging and burning, pillage and burning. But I burned and pillaged.
Actually, that happened to me before, yeah?
I've set a house on fire and pillaged after. I went straight into the fire, obviously, and I have, as you can see, lost all of my hair. Burned right off.
You silly lad.
Hello, my dear friends. How are you? I'm Ari Thurger, and today I'm going to talk about beards in history and the use of beards and long hair as well, and the importance to the male figure in ancient times, especially among warriors, and why all of a sudden warriors start to shave their faces and their hair. This was a question posed by one of my patrons, actually, Mr. Wagner Jasman. Thank you so much, sir. I have answered this question a long time ago, obviously. And of course, I have shared it among all of my other patrons, as I usually do. But now I've decided it was a pretty good time, I think, to turn this one into video format. My patrons are awesome. All of them have beards, including the women. And, well, if you become my patron, your beards shall grow as well. It's a given fact. So, maybe consider becoming my patron. Now, well, before you ask, yes, indeed, I have shaved my head. It's in plain sight. Thank you so much. And before you come up with any conclusions as to why I did this, well, there are 1,001 reasons why people shave their heads. So, in the comments below, try to figure it out. Place your bets and let the games begin. After 32 years of existence, I have finally shaved my own head at home for reasons and because of stuff. Welcome to 2020. It's a pretty weird year. I know some of you will even stop subscribing to this channel because I lost my hair. But honestly, if you are here just to look at me, well, it's a pretty poor way to waste your time, as this is supposed to be a channel to share information and not for me to waddle about as if I were a circus curiosity. But trust me, you will get used to this unfortunate event in my life sooner than I will. Besides, I have a beard, so well, to sort of make a balance, or my head would surely fall off. Now, don't give me that look, and let's start our today's video, please. We have all noticed that in most ancient civilizations, the use of a beard and long hair in men was quite common. It was neither for aesthetic reasons, also, but not just that, nor because ancient civilizations were barbaric and unconcerned with personal hygiene. It was in fact the Romans that put an end to long beards and long hair in men, but we will get to that further ahead. In ancient civilizations, the use of long beard and or with long hair was a source of manly pride. This comes from the prehistoric spiritual belief that the hair in our heads is the extension of our souls, of our spiritual essence, to be more precise. The longer it is, more powerful we become because the soul or one's spiritual existence and all its components come out of the body, extending the energy residing in the individual. Many civilizations wore long hair, or long beards as well, to show off their power and prowess in all sorts of things, especially in combat, in conflict. The longer it is, the more powerful a man is, because all his spiritual power is coming out of the body. Men have always had a lot of concerns in terms of size. Now, remember that old biblical story of Samson and Delilah? Samson was betrayed by his lover Delilah, who ordered a servant to cut his hair while he was sleeping, after she had learned that the source of his superhuman strength and power and force was his hair. He lost all his strength, even his manliness, or so the scriptures say, and so she turned him over to his Philistine enemies, who gouged out his eyes and forced him to grind grain in a mill. Basically, he was enslaved. He could no longer fight back because he simply had no strength, no force, no spiritual force. His personal spiritual power was gone due to the loss of his hair. And this is a good indicator of the old spiritual belief I have spoken previously. Just an example. Samson lost his pride, his manliness, his very soul was cut, the extension of his spirit was cut, so he lost all of his potency. And so his power no longer emanated from him. Without hair, he was humiliated. That's the whole point. He lost his pride and self-esteem and identity. Now, speaking of slavery, well, precisely, many civilizations of the past would shave the heads of the conquered male warriors to take out their strength, their force, their pride, their spiritual strength, their manliness, a sort of castration of the spirit, and thus they would be enslaved and no longer have the power and strength to fight back. A very powerful psychological effect upon the male warrior, directly hitting on the male pride. Now, the very first civilizations we know of that let their hairs or beards grow long were the peoples of Northern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, ancient Lebanon, Mesopotamia, Egypt, etc. Ancient Semitic civilizations and non-Semitic civilizations as well, such as Egyptians and Sumerians. And they devoted a great care to oiling and dressing their beards. Most of these civilizations gave great attention to the hair and beard. We can see this, for instance, in Assyrian sculptures, the statues of men with long beards, beards arranged in 3 or more rows of small tight curls. The highest-ranking ancient Egyptians grew hair on their chin, which was often dyed in reddish-brown, as you know it. A metal false beard was even worn by queens and kings in ancient Egypt, which was a sign of sovereignty. So pay close attention to that. So it's actually a lot more noticeable the use of long beards and long hair among nobility and other members of the societies of the ancient world who held a high rank in such societies. The ancient Greeks, for instance, regarded the beard as a sign of virility. It got to the point that to distinguish a Roman from a Greek, well, of course, by the people's foreigner to the classical Mediterranean cultural world, well, people just had to look at their faces. Although it must be pointed out that many Romans, including emperors and other members with a certain high social status, were more inclined to have an Hellenic lifestyle, wore beards. To the Greeks, the beard was only shaven or left untrimmed as a sign of mourning, and a beardless face was regarded as a sign of effeminacy. And this idea of shaving a beard as a sign of mourning, a sign of sorrow and pain, for the loss of someone close, is also recurrent in other societies, other civilizations. But perhaps more noticeable when in such societies men shaved their heads, taking away their former condition, taking away their self-identity, their former strength, in an attempt to get closer to the dead. It's curious that in ancient Egypt, the priests of the dead, or those dealing with death and mummifying the bodies, the dead bodies, would often have their heads shaved. People often assume that most Egyptians shave their heads, but that's not true, as they had a great personal pride on their appearance. So it's in those who worked with the dead and death that had their heads shaved, most likely because without such facial features, beard and hair, they were not recognizable. They did not have a fixed identity, which, in superstitious terms, would prove to be quite useful, not being recognized by the dead, but also as a form of taking away their identity as people that belong to the realm of the dead and not the living, because their reality was much different than that of the living, being concerned with the dead and death and making the preparations so the dead may go into the afterlife. So such people dedicated to the dead were different members of the society, quite apart from the general population, therefore not really belonging to the Egyptian society, and as such they were not permitted to have an identity. And the use of beard was most likely only for certain members of the society, of the Egyptian society, nobility, royalty, and military leaders. Beard was an extension of it was an expression of identity, but also a mark of high social status. Since prehistoric times and among early civilizations as well, men wore beards, and it wasn't because they were careless about their looks or the lack of means to shave. As an archaeologist, I have had contact with chipped stone tools as old as the Paleolithic, tiny fragments, very sharp even to this day, whose purpose was precisely to shave and trim. And I've also found and had contact with small blades from the late Chalcolithic and early Western Bronze Age, and tweezers as well, and pincers, and carried by warriors specifically, which show us that along their war or battle paraphernalia, they kept boxes and bags with tools to take care of their appearance, to groom their beards and hair, also including hair removal from the body, as well as trimming hair and beard, taking care of their appearance. Wearing a beard not only made men appear more intimidating to their opponents, but it was also a sign of manhood. And for practical reasons, because it provided a certain degree of warmth and protection from the natural elements. But it was mostly a sign of manhood, becoming a man and no longer a child, becoming the adult. Having a beard or letting it grow was part of the initiation into manhood. Beards were regarded as a symbol of a man's honor as well. For certain Germanic tribes, a young man was not allowed to shave or cut his hair until he had slain an enemy. Prisoners of many early civilizations and others who had transgressed social rules often had their beards cut off, as well as their hairs. And take special notice at this. Low members of the society or unwanted members, those who were incapable of following social norms and the rules of a society and against the authority, or were people simply subjugated to the highest authority, had their heads shaved or beards cut off. Now, we have certain accounts that among the Celtic tribes, certain Celtic tribes, before having been conquered by Romans, the beard was fundamental to a man's identity, precisely. And solemn oaths were taken and regarded as real if men swore by their beards. And it's also among certain Celtic tribes that we have indications of shaving one's head in mourning, precisely as previously said. So, obviously, the male gods of many civilizations had luxuriant and long and powerful beards. The gods were the identity of a civilization, of a culture, of a tribe, their collective identity. Now, throughout history, we see many ups and downs, of course, in the use of a beard, but since the Roman Empire, there was a great decline on the use of beards among various peoples, to this day actually, of the so-called civilized world, as a direct result of Roman influence. As the Roman Empire grew and expanded, the popularity of beards waned until quite late, actually, among many European societies, and this custom of having short hair or a beardless face, or both, was extended to other civilizations across the globe with colonialism. Now, let's speak a little bit about reasons behind the Roman military rules in the use of short hair and clean-shaven faces. Just a general panorama on this conception, of course. Now, Traditionally, long hair has always been a symbol of masculinity. All the great warriors of history had long hair. The Greeks even wrote odes, lyric poetry, praising the long hair of their heroes, and beard as well. And of course, the Norse, as well as old German peoples and among the Celts as well, they are famous for their long hairs and long beards. The Lombards, for instance, take their name from the Latin term longobardi, meaning long beards, which for cultural/military Roman standards was an absolute shock, which is why they labeled these people as long beards, longobardi, Lombards, because it really stood out in comparison to Roman social norms. The American indigenous peoples, especially Northern American natives, famous for their long, shiny scalps. The Japanese samurai, who arranged their hair in a certain fashion as a symbol of honor, and they would cut the hair when they lost honor, etc. Now, the Romans were the ones who came up with short hair between the 1st century before the Common Era and the 5th after the Common Era. Shaving wasn't a thing to the Romans during their early history, including during and under Rome's early republic. Short hair and clean-shaven faces among Roman soldiers would be somewhat useful in battle. They believed that this gave them defensive advantages, since their opponents could not grab them by their hair. This also helped them to recognize each other on the battlefield, but at the same time, it was a political decision, actually. And the emperors imposed on men, mostly on soldiers, this custom as a form of political social control. I shall explain this further ahead as well. Many cultures continue to maintain the traditional custom of associating long hair with masculinity, even after the Roman invasions, of course. There were even societies that forced men to wear wigs, since their natural hairs were not beautiful enough. For instance, in France during the 13th century. Now, short hair in men is a relatively new invention that has nothing to do with aesthetics. Nowadays, most men wear it short because the people who were conquered by the Romans marked this custom in their societies, generation after generation, or rather, have this collective association that long hair and having a beard is an indicator or a sign of barbarism, filthiness, and uncivilization. A Roman idea. And we inherited it, just like we have inherited many concepts that we cannot totally explain because they are deeply rooted in our social collective consciousness. The great majority of the Western societies, the Western cultural world, to this day are still very much Roman in nature. It has been like this for so long that a lot of things we do every day we don't even question them, because it has been like this for centuries and becomes something perfectly normal. Or it seems so. Nowadays it seems almost natural, and many believe that many see themselves better this way, with short hair and beardless faces. But this belief is the result of cultural indoctrination, starting with the Romans and perpetuated by Christianity and then colonialism as a form of social control, especially to control the warrior class. By controlling the warrior class, the conquering of a civilization is halfway done. Besides, the reasons the Romans had to cut their hair and clean-shaven faces, as already mentioned, the reason for short hair became a symbol of humiliation. When a warrior was captured, they would cut off his mane to humiliate him, to take away his beauty and pride, and most importantly, taking away his identity. This custom has taken over in our modern military service as well. When the new recruits begin their training, the first thing done to them is to cut or to shave their hair to undermine their self-esteem, make them submissive, and make them see who commands. The biggest lie is that it is more hygienic. That happened to me. I loved my beautiful long and silver golden hair when I was younger, and well, I started to lose it, and now it's completely gone as you see it. Too proud of it, it became a weakness in me, I must admit. Today, this seems an innocent practice for men to have short hair and a beardless face. It's a self-illusion interiorized by centuries of social indoctrination that is this idea that it is very comfortable for men to wear our hair short and even shave our beards. But if we think about it, the social obligation to cut hair is somewhat comparable to the oppression suffered by women throughout history, for instance, by not letting them show their legs, forbidden at some point the use of short skirts. And that stigma is still visible nowadays, and it obviously no longer applies to our modern reality, our modern society. But many women to this day refuse to use certain clothing due to social oppression and indoctrination. And every time they go against certain social norms, it gives a sort of self-illusional authority to other members of society that feel in the right to shame women because they are going against the norms, are going against the system, which in fact they are going against the subtle indoctrination of the authority. And men have a harder time to perceive and understand this because the male figure has been indoctrinated to follow the rules and obey the authority. It isn't just the stigmatization of women in many aspects and in many levels, of course, but men have also suffered many kinds of stigmatization, and one of which was the shameful social illusion of using long hair and long beards. Cultural indoctrination as a form of taking away people's personality and identity for social control. One of the very first things Europeans did upon invading the Americas was to have the natives cut off their hair, especially among Northern American natives. The same Roman political social control to humiliate, take away the pride and identity of the male warrior for a better cultural control. Control the warrior class and take away their self-identity and notions of collective identity, and they are used as the oppressive tool to subjugate their own people on their own grounds into submitting to the new authority, the new foreign authority. We see this in relation to religion as well, especially Christianity and especially among certain branches of Christianity, such as with the Benedictines. The tonsure, the practice of cutting or shaving some or all of the hair on the scalp as a sign of religious devotion or humility. Actually, it's a Roman early Catholic practice, but also a general Roman custom among the military, brought into early Christianity because early Christians considered themselves warriors, soldiers of God, soldiers of the Christian church. Shaving one's head or having short hair and a beardless face as a means of humiliation, devotion, self-abasement, and most importantly, an act of submission to the authority, in this case to the highest religious authority, God and the Holy Church. And in the case of the Roman military that lasted to our days, submission to those highest in command. Cutting off the hair and or beards or both has always been a sign of submission to the political, religious and military authority, which is why throughout the centuries we have had plenty of outcasts, pirates, bandits, outlaws, and so on and so forth, using a beard and or long hair, and the revolutionary figures against oppression with long beards, precisely as a protest against the system. Of course, after the Roman custom of shaving men's hair and beards as a method of social control. Well, before that, it was still a sign of humiliation and taking away one's self-esteem, of course, obviously, but generally done to defeated warriors and not the general population. or in specific religious or ceremonial cases, as in taking away one's identity to avoid being recognized by the supernatural. During the Middle Ages, once again we return to that, it became quite normal for the upper classes to grow beards again, especially knights whose facial hair was a sign of masculinity and honor. This was probably due to Germanic influences actually. The Romans might have spread Christianity, but the peak of Christendom was during the Middle Ages, and it was with the Franks. Well, the Franks who first started to spread Christianity. The Franks were a collection of Germanic peoples, as you know, from the Lower and Middle Rhine, who still kept the tradition of using long beards. The Franks at some point mingled with the Frisians, eventually, another Germanic group indigenous to the coastal parts of what is now the Netherlands and northwestern Germany. Doesn't matter. They also maintained some of their social traditions. But the Franks, upon converting to Christianity, started to shave off the beards and shave or having short hair of the general population, but not among nobility. So it's curious that in the Middle Ages, again, it's precisely the upper classes that maintained beards and hair as a sign of their authority over their subjects. So to this day, there's still this very recurrent custom in our societies that men must shave their faces and have at least their hair quite short. It is now a very subtle way of social control, so very deeply rooted in our collective consciousness. I remember when I had long hair, I can't even count the amount of times people said that, well, having long hair was for women and I should cut it off. This, of course, they said before having a taste of my fist. And I have heard, I have beard since I was 13, so I also remember, and I have heard, and this still happens nowadays, people saying that I should shave or at least have it shorter. It's funny how deeply rooted this still is in our societies. If you go against the normal behavior, especially in terms of appearance, you immediately become the target, because you are not playing by the rules of social control and destruction of self-identity imposed by the authority of our societies. And, well, let's not forget, as another example, the Saxons, who wore beards and continued to do so for a considerable time after they arrived to England, to Britannia. Which it became a powerful kingdom of Christianity, not only during the reign of Richard I of England, as you know, the Lionheart, but think of all those monks who helped to spread Christianity, especially into Ireland and into Scandinavia as well. Beards kept by the political and military authority, but not among the common folk or the lower classes, and not among the religious Christian orders. And did I forget about Lindisfarne, the most famous Viking raid of 793? Not bloody like it. Lindisfarne became the base of Christian evangelism in the north of England. In 793, a Viking raid on Lindisfarne caused much consternation throughout the Christian Western cultural world, and is now often taken as you know it, the beginning of the Viking Age. Imagine all those beardless and hairless priests, monks, and the contrast with the bearded Vikings, the clash of cultures and the visual impact. On one side, the Christian monks following the religious rule of self-abasement, loss of identity, and negation of self-esteem, and on the other side, coming beyond the sea and penetrating the mists, the bearded demons of the north, who clearly had no intentions of showing any signs of religious devotion or humility, as they clearly still kept those beards. So this clash of mentalities and cultures. And of course, speaking about Vikings, let's not put aside the beautiful Viking combs. Viking warriors carried combs as well as knives on their seafaring ventures. Vanity was as much part of a Viking as, well, everything else that made a Viking. Hair formed an important part of their identity. We know from Norse sagas, Old Norse written sources, that hair and beard had a great significance for Vikings and Old Norse ordinary people as a mark of distinctiveness. They took a great deal of care and pride with their grooming. Hair was so important, and keeping it healthy and clean, of course, that they even took combs to their graves, quite frequently actually. Scandinavian combs made of reindeer antler have been found plenty of times in great quantity, and they most date from pre-Viking periods actually, which shows that in Scandinavia the use of long hair and beard was a thing just like in other civilizations across the globe since prehistoric times, and it wasn't because people were uncivilized. Clearly, they had means of taking care of their hair, maintaining it healthy and clean. If long hair and beard was indeed a sign of completely disregarding one's appearance and hygiene, why the use of tools, specific tools to keep body hair clean and looking good, right? Now, turning back to England, during the period of great transitions by the end of the Middle Ages and entering the modern era, in the time of Henry VIII, who reigned from 1509 to 1547, and beards took an unexpected twist when beards were declared to be a taxable offense, even though Henry himself sported a full beard right up to the time of his own death. And when Queen Elizabeth I came to the throne from 1558 to 1603, she had a strong dislike of beards herself and made it a point to continue beard taxation simply as an expression of her personal disfavor. The taxation of beards was an economic measure also adopted by other countries during this period precisely and further on in history up until the 18th century at least, especially in Russia under Peter I, Peter the Great. So for many centuries, for at least over a millennia, keeping hair short and shaving off a man's beard has been a subtle tool from the political authority as a means of social control. Take the identity of man and their self-esteem, take it away, and they shall be easily controlled by the system in which they are inserted. And the same thing goes to women, don't worry. Unfortunately, shaving off their heads in many occasions has been precisely to take away their pride and self-esteem, self-love, and taking away their identity and as a form of humiliation, and this includes body hair actually. To this day, the great majority of people in our societies get a little bit judgmental when they see a woman with hairy legs. It's so deeply rooted in our collective consciousness, this stigmatization and impositions of the higher classes over the rest of the population. Regular shaving from the part of women is a thing with no more than 100 years actually. Oh, certainly, we have evidences in prehistory already with Neanderthals that they used tools for shaving, but that was usually a thing among men, among the warrior classes, to shave the hair off of one's body. There came a time, only 100 years or so, when our society finally decided that women had to shave too. This doesn't mean women didn't shave before. They did on some occasions, but rarely. But not all of them, and it wasn't mandatory. Which is why now among many men, when they see a woman with body hair, they freak out. And some even believe women don't have any body hair at all, whatsoever, and that they just carry on with their lives as hairless as when they were born. 100 years ago or so, the shaving industry grew and prospered while walking hand in hand with the social authorities' attempts for social control and maintaining the population with specific hairstyles and specific behaviors, usually noticeable in a new trend, a new fashion of social behavior, because people have the tendency to follow trends, to follow what's new and what everybody else is doing, because they don't want to stand out. They are afraid to be outcasts, afraid to not being accepted or to belong by the rest of the society. Because everybody that doesn't follow the new trend, it's indeed cast aside by others. Because they are just being too unique for everybody's liking, against the system. This is all the usual psychological propaganda, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet so effective. Because it's something normal, because it's meant to feel normal. And people follow without questioning or without even realizing that their pattern of behavior isn't normal at all, but that they are being controlled by the constructed reality of the authority of their social systems. It was actually in the late 19th century and early 20th century that there was a made-up idea as a form of propaganda to control the population and have them all shaved. The idea that in Europe, it was in France to be more precise, it was a trend for women to shave their body hair and men keeping their hair short and shave their faces, leaving only a mustache or nothing at all, because it was the height of sophistication. This trend never actually existed, and it was simply a political propaganda, and everybody believed in it, and they followed it, and then they created a trend because they didn't want to stand out. And since then, women have been shaving too regularly, and most men keeping their hair short and shaving their face since Roman times as well, which now feels something completely normal. But it was meant to destroy self-esteem and self-identity, and as a form of humiliation and submission, and a custom spread by colonialism into other civilizations across the globe. When the authorities of our societies want us to follow something, the first thing they will do is creating a trend and shaming everyone that doesn't follow it, creating a sequence of shameful attitudes and ideas if one doesn't follow the new trend. And it bloody works all the damn time. Which is why when I had, for instance, an example, when I had long hair, people would say that's for women, as one of the shaming ideas of not keeping with the short hair the social and political authority wants you to. And having the beard short or not at all, because a manly man doesn't need facial hair. Again, the same shameful ideas. It's all about controlling perception by psychologically influencing the population into believing what is right and what is wrong. And when people think they are better than anyone else by following the trend, the new fashion, they are actually just very well-trained citizens, believing that their perception of the social reality is actually their own. Be attentive at that. That escalated quickly, I know, but, well, one of these days I might do a video concerning subtle means of controlling the population from the part of our governments. Because, my aim with this channel has always been to help people, and people help me, of course, into spreading knowledge. Because I do believe the more knowledgeable we all are, the less likely we will fall into imposed illusions of perception, and we will question everything. The aim here is to help thinking for ourselves, questioning everything, question every pattern of behavior, every belief system, always questioning why things are done the way they are, questioning every single thing we think it's normal and why do we think it's normal. Alright, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was useful and I hope you have liked it. And trust me, just because I have shaven my head, it doesn't mean I have lost my strength and power and potency. In the course of the next few months, maybe I may lose some physical strength and power and feel a little bit weaker, but my spirit will not lose any of its potency, I believe. Don't worry, it doesn't matter. Now, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för det.
Mr. Crowley! Chun chun chun! Crazy! It's just how it goes! Yeah! Millions of people! Yeah! Living as fools! Hey, come here! If you like this video, please subscribe! You don't recognize me, you little bastard! Hello? Do you recognize me? I'm going to eat you. If you like this video, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up, whatever. Well, if you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to this channel, and share this video among all of your beardless friends, including the women. Women should have beards too. It gives me something to hang on to.